I will just briefly introduce myself. My name is Biljana Anicic. I've been helping government and other government departments and other organizations with their digital and also data transformations. And I've been on the GeoIgnite Advisory Committee, and I'm responsible for digital transformation, but also leadership and diversity, which this panel kind of belongs to. So just to introduce the topic as well, it's very important to consider diversity with the mounting evidence that diverse teams make better decisions. So it makes business sense to start talking about it again. But also at GeoIgnite, increasing diversity, equity, and inclusiveness of geo industry is part of our mission. So this is part of our mission to really bring leaders together and help inspire younger generations. Also, this COVID-19 pandemic is one of those disruptions that we will touch our talks as well, but we already started talking about them. And it will require a variety of perspectives to solve such a big problem as well. And also a variety of data, different data sets, different layers. So it's diversity in every sense. So reminding everyone that also latest research shows that decisions made by and executed by diverse teams delivered 60% better results. There's an MIT research that shows that. And so our intent is to spur the grassroots of a more diverse ecosystem where diversity of thinking and knowledge will ignite innovation and better outcomes for us all. So that's just the introduction. I'm also proud to introduce our panelists, and please welcome in alphabetical order. So it's not kind of based on anything else, ladies first or whatever, but in alphabetical order. David Aiko, co-founder of Ecosys, 100% Aboriginal owned, operated business that provides professional consulting services in information technology, human resources, and Aboriginal policy development. Welcome again, David.
Pleasure, thank you.
Dr. Nadine Alame, I had like maybe 3 pages of stuff that I could tell you about Nadine, so bear with me. There's a short paragraph, but I think powerful enough to represent her. Dr. Nadine Alame is the CEO of the Open Geospatial Consortium, which is OGC, we all know, responsible for creating and integrating the strategic direction and business plans of the consortium, and in partnerships with Open Geospatial Consortium board, members, and staff. With entrepreneurial experience in the aviation and US public sector, she's a graduate of, listen to this, MIT with PhD in computer and information systems engineering, a master's in civil and environmental engineering, and a master's in city planning. Speaking of diversity. Amina Diab is the former chief of staff to the Deputy Minister of the Policy Coordination Office in the government of Alberta. Amina unfortunately sends her regrets as timing of this panel coincides with her transition to a new leadership role. And we wish her all the best in her new leadership role and thank her for the past participation and input in shaping this panel, and really looking forward to hopefully have her back next year when she's less busy. So we have Ted here. I don't know, something happened last year as well. We had, last minute changes to the panel, but it's all good. I think we're, flexibility is one of the key things that we can all embrace when dealing with adversity or change. So Paul Kennedy is the VP of Geointelligence and MDA. our panel is lucky to have him as well. He has 25 years of Earth observations, GIS, and marine science. And we'll let you maybe fill this in a bit better. And David Getchurch, last but not least, the CEO of Rivercross Technologies, geomatics engineer and technology entrepreneur, specializing in location-based solutions, including spatial tracking and interactive real-time mapping. Thank you very much for joining us. It was a bit longer introduction, but I think it's good for people to see context and have an idea who you are and to really kind of get that context for your perspectives. So let's get started with some questions. And I'll start with David Aiko, again in alphabetical order. Please tell us your story and focusing on some leadership traits or leadership principles that had helped you in your career. Any specific strategies that you can share, or those that helped you, especially in overcoming adversity and so on. So, David?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question, actually. And I'm glad you asked it, because it actually made me reflect upon how did I get here, So I guess what it is a lot of it as an Indigenous person was, derived at, I hate to say this, but being an Indigenous person, I just found out recently that my mom was, I almost got caught up in the 60s scoop. And by that, if people don't know about it, but back in Winnipeg and Manitoba, there was a lot of Indigenous children that were taken away from and given into foster care, which is still a very prevalent issue to this day. And of course, my father was from Trinidad and Tobago, and he ended up, taking the whole family to Trinidad and Tobago, and eventually we moved here back to Canada. So coming back from a mixed background, but the way that they were escaping, like losing their children. But that kind of formed me. So I think that as an Indigenous person, there's a lot of what we call blood memory in that. So, so I think by being actually in an urban environment kind of opened my eyes if I was, let's say, living on a reserve or something else like that. But being an Indigenous person and, having that, that urban experience. So school is a big thing, right? So my parents always insisted I, continue on to post-secondary education. So I managed to, my mom was a writer, and so I studied arts and science. My dad was an engineer, slapped both those together and actually, started working in the aerospace field. That was a non-traditional for an Indigenous person. But here's the rub. I did not know that I was Indigenous all that time. It wasn't a very big thing for me.
So that's your strategy?
It was my sorry?
So that was your strategy?
That was my strategy, yeah. Well, it was, I think at the very end of the day, the leadership side of it was sort of inside of me all the time. Because I always wanted to do something different. But it's a series of events that, getting into arts and sciences and going into science and working for the engineering field, being one of the few people in my around the water cooler Indigenous. The Oka crisis, formed the way I was as well. And realizing I'm a culmination and this is affecting me. But I think the big thing that really was that it kind of just drove a sense of passion for reconciliation. And, when I saw Geospatial as a sort of a leveling field because of the mere fact that there was not a lot of Indigenous people in the first place, and B, we're the highest users of Geospatial. So working in Germany, I saw this opportunity, but entrepreneurial spirit has always been inside of me as well. But pulling all these different, experiences that are personal to me, but also the professional side. And I think the one thing that really kind of is making the COSIS really work well is working with a diverse bunch of people, both non-Indigenous and Indigenous and experts in their field. And what has happened is, from a diversity perspective, being able to share my experience with, Indigenous people, and we have this common experience, but also being able to share it with my non-Indigenous colleagues and leadership as well, and what they're bringing to the table. So it is really, I've been fortunate to be be given that sense of drive from my own personal experiences, my scholastic side or my education side, plus all the opportunities I had in engineering and working in Germany, but also bringing in the right kind of people that I needed to kind of push the ball forward, and for them to also have an open mind as well, so and sharing under this experience as well. So even though we're 100% owned and operated, in a company, we work with non-Indigenous people and Indigenous people, but we all have this common vision of reconciliation, which goes back to where I am at the very end of the day.
Thank you so much,
that's
David.
in a nutshell.
That's wonderful, and that's a very important perspective for Canada and the world. Indigenous, the history of things that have happened to Indigenous people, and sort of the need for reconciliation are common to us all, I believe, whether you come from a war-torn country or you're coming from, a country that was has changed for environmental reasons, and maybe Indigenous populations were displaced. All these things are very important. Your perspective is very important to the world. And I'm thinking of talking to Nadine next, because the education, the impressive list of basically educational achievements that you've had, the fact that also you are an entrepreneur, a couple of common things with David's, and of course being a trailblazer in your industry, being the first woman CEO of the OGC. How did you accomplish that, Nadine?
Well, first of all, thank you for the nice introduction, and I'm very, very honored to be in the company of the other panelists, and with you. You're amazing too, and you definitely set the tone for, I think, this genuine sharing of experiences and maybe lessons learned. I think I'll echo what David said. I don't know how I got here. Like, you get here, right? But I think I feel super fortunate that we are in the geospatial industry, because it represents diversity in so many ways. Because you're not in a specific domain. Some of us do it in defense, and some of us do it in Earth observation and climate change, and now health, right, with the whole COVID thing. And it works at a local level, indigenous levels. It works at international levels. You cannot pick another, essentially, domain or community that's this diverse. And my favorite, and what attracts me to maybe standards and the Open Geospatial Consortium, is I love working every day, if not every hour, with somebody with a different accent, because they came from somewhere else, and it's just like you learn so much. What's missing is still the woman representation. So all the women, I think here in the attendee list, I see more than 100 people. We need more of you, and please let us know how we can help you, because sometimes you have to tell us. It's not just us leading the way. I think in terms of leadership, I would say it's the genuine passion. It's like you don't decide to be, I'm going to be a leader. It's usually you're so passionate about something that people start following you because you represent something, and then they start joining the bus. And we are collaborative in nature. We don't think in terms of competition, because that's how you grow, by actually joining forces with other people. And again, this is a uniqueness of this geospatial industry. And I would say the last thing is this nonstop hunger to learn and to solve problems. And, again, this weird situation that we're in right now is another, us in the geospatial industry are actually energized, because we want to try to help contribute to the solution for COVID, and actually beyond COVID, for any pandemic going forward. And you see this buzz in this industry. That's leadership, not on a personal level. It's just like all of us energized by a mission. But then, as much as we have diversity, and like you mentioned, educational experiences, domains, and types of people and countries of origin, I'd like to see more of a mix of young and mature, as my kids say. So, and then a little bit more women, actually a lot more women in technology. We have a long way to go. We make progress, but we still have a long way to go.
Those are some excellent practical points, Nadine. That is great, and a message for the new generation. And yes, we are all, we need some cross-learning. So even in Indigenous context, the elders and sort of younger generations, learning from each other, elders could learn technology and so on and so forth, for example, or vice versa. You know, I'm learning from my son every day. Those are interesting things that it's no longer, you know, you had the, you know, firm authority of a father or mother in the family, or whatever the situation was. Now it's more like, again, equal playing field and opportunity to contribute, not just to the family matters, but also to our communities and to the world. So that's amazing. I'm hearing all that from your sort of from what you had to say to us, and appreciate your perspectives. Maybe to talk about sort of additional practical advices from, let's say, David Gachuch. If I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, please let me know. David Gachuch?
Yes. Yeah, no, Gachuche
okay.
is good. And I think the one thing about, you know, being on a panel that is bringing such diverse backgrounds, I'm sure we've all at some point fallen victim to a name mispronunciation. So yes, that was 90% there, and that's good. So yeah, David Gachuche, you know, and just to, you know, to answer your question, I set some background. You know, I'm a geomatics engineer. I came to Canada. I moved to Canada about 25 years ago and studied at the University of Calgary, geomatics engineering. Just to put it in context, at the time there were 2 Black students in first year at U of C. So we're not talking, you know, and yes, I'm not saying we were the first 2, but, you know, that set the stage. There were, I think, 5 women in my geomatics class when we specialized out of a class of 50. So, you know, very quickly it became apparent of some of the differences, but I embraced that. And, you know, shortly after graduating, not working for more than a year, I decided to start Rivercross Technologies. We've developed software using geospatial technologies and deployed solutions across Africa, Middle East. We have operations in Asia, employed several hundred people over the last 15 years. So it's been quite a ride, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity to solve problems using geomatics technology. But I think, you know, on when it comes to the point of diversity, I think the biggest lessons for me and some of the principles that I've applied that have helped me grow my leadership. I love what Nadine said about passion. I think passion is the absolute fuel for any leader. But I think what I learned with working in diverse backgrounds, you know, with business operations in Canada, in Kenya, in Dubai, in China, I learned about the importance of relationships, meaningful relationships, and how important they are. In a company that I grew organically, I never raised startup capital from anyone, but I raised a lot of relationship capital. So having diverse views and perspectives on as you build relationships is really powerful. I think the other thing that I learned as I built my teams and teams, not just the teams that work for me, but stakeholders, customers, vendors, suppliers, was striving to make everybody else better. And I think, you know, when you look at it that way, you will always see a different perspective. And diversity is not always about difference in race or religion or ethnicity or gender. It's really also about perspectives, training, education, backgrounds. And when you look at all those things and strive to make every person better for themselves and better than you, it really has helped me, and it's one of the strategies that I've used to grow with diversity in my growth. So, you know, I think another thing that's really critical in leadership, from my perspective, has been about having a clear and ambitious vision. And when you have a clear and ambitious vision, it doesn't see differences in problems. It doesn't see, you don't see a race or a gender, or, you see the problem. And when you see a big problem and you have an ambitious vision to solve that problem, you automatically find yourself applying diverse solutions, leaning on diverse people to contribute to those solutions. And people will, as Nadine said, will just follow you as that vision helps to fuel your passion, or the passion helps to fuel your vision. So that's kind of, where I come from, and how I ended up here, and some of the strategies I apply.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. David Cachuche.
Yes.
Okay,
excellent.
I'm learning every day. Speaking of, sort of learning, my biggest interoperability hack with different people is learning at least 1 or 2 words in their language. And it can be, just, ni hao, or, like something like hello or shukran or whatever the word is. I find that people immediately kind of find you, but it's miigwech, or, whatever the word is. You are more kind of interoperable with them, if to use the geeky term. But it's something that I'm, again, learning every day, and encourage actually everyone to try. And you'll be amazed what kind of result you can get from just that one little hack. Mm-hmm. So, Paul Kennedy, he was hilarious, actually. He said, industry doesn't need more of the middle-aged, white-haired guys, but I'm really passionate I want to contribute to your panel, and so we kind of accepted him as a panelist. I hope nobody else minds.
Yeah, feel free to mute me at any time. My kids do that all the time, so it would not really be that different.
So Dave, so Paul, please, let us know your story, just, briefly, and maybe some of the leadership principles or things that you've done to overcome adversity, or anything like that, anything that, new generation of leaders could appreciate or be able to use on their path.
Sure. And I guess maybe I'll start just by acknowledging my tremendous good fortune, right? And frankly, my privilege in life. I've been a very lucky guy. And in fact, I think for me, when I think about how the people on our teams succeed, it's, sponsorship is such an important part. And for me, it was a huge thing for me. I am not the smartest guy at MDA, or the smartest person, the smartest anybody at MDA. I'm not in the top 100, but I have had 2 or 3 really influential supporters, people who not only had weight within the company, but they had weight within the industry, and they took me to customers, and they took me to regulatory agencies, and they taught me what it took to be successful. And I think that sponsorship is such an important piece. And it's interesting because I also feel like, from the things that each of you have said so far, I think learning from other people and absorbing how other people like to work and want to work, and how other people's brains function is both fascinating to me, and I think a really important part of bringing together a team to try and accomplish a goal. And I guess that's where I've always tried to act, is in that space of being open to alternate solutions, understanding that there's always a different perspective, and the more perspectives you have on a really hard problem, the more likely you are to get to a finish line somewhere. And one of the things that's interesting to me is, as we, MDA as a company is pivoting, we've just been taken private, and we have kind of this new operating stance, and diversity and inclusion is a much bigger part of our world today, certainly than I think it has been historically. And we're working hard on those sorts of things. But I think for me, when I look back at the good fortune that I've had, it's, yeah, education, super important. Support of my family was amazing. In the work environment, that sponsorship and that opening up of new opportunities, you know, the idea of somebody sort of grabbing me by the scruff of my neck and saying, I know you don't think you can do this, but I need you to do it. To me, that's how we potentially don't leave as many people behind. Because I guess when I look back and I think about my career and I think about all the people, I'm in the office, which is why I'm looking around. But like all the people who work in this place, who I frankly consider to be like family after 22 years, I think about some of the people that have been left behind, right? Some of the people who've struggled to maybe move into more senior positions or to take on bigger pieces of scope, and I think about, you know, how do we not leave so many people behind? How do we make sure that we keep as many people in the conversation as possible? And for people who want to be challenged and who want to do new and different things, how do we create an environment where they can be successful and feel successful? Because I think that's one of the hardest things is there, you know, I think we unintentionally sometimes end up with barriers in job descriptions and you know, work schedules and all sorts of odd little things that maybe I don't think of because I haven't really had to contend with them. But anyway, just a couple of thoughts there.
That's great. I would also add a great sense of humor as one of your superpowers in sort of rising to the top as well. You know, being a vice president of a, you know, large sort of division is a great achievement as well. So quickly, going back to research that, you know, shows diversity and inclusion mean better decisions. We know that organizations can capitalize on that. So there's a difference between sort of working with homogeneous teams and heterogeneous teams. So when there's diversity, and as we kind of started talking about, both in age and you know, gender and from all sorts of different perspective, educational levels, different sort of viewpoints and ways of thinking can assist organization even with the, you know, bringing the competitive advantage to them. So I'm wondering, Nadine, if you have any thoughts on that, and how much of the sort of existing sort of diversity in employees that, you know, perhaps already are within your organization or in people's companies, what are the sort of any practical insights that you may share on how we can kind of bring them in? So kind of building on Paul was saying, and kind of that sponsorship or being an ally to someone or a mentor. Is there anything that comes to mind that you can share with us that can help, again, organizations and future leaders with this important task in making their company better and making better decisions? I mean, I don't know, there's no, like, it's a win-win from what I can see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely a win-win. And like, to me, it's like, sometimes it's hard to think about a decision that was made better because of diversity, but like, I also experience it every day. Literally, say these days we want to organize a webinar right in mid-August, but because we have a diverse team and some of them are in Europe, they say August is not a good month for Europe, right? That's a hint of diversity. The other hint is, okay, great, let's do it September 6th or whatever. And it's like, actually, if you have kids, this is the week they go to school. You really don't want people to travel. This is diversity, because you're actually trying to include all these, you know, different, you know, people everywhere. I think in terms of your question, how do we do it? I think it cannot be just one person. I think that would be my answer. It cannot be one person trying to advocate for diversity. It has to become part of the culture of the organization, and it's part of how you pick your people, not because they're diverse, but because also they believe in diversity. And I think I'm fortunate, for example, and I see it, and I cannot take all the credit for it, or maybe any credit, because these people are amazing. But when I look at my team, we're doing our best. We're nowhere near perfect or anything, but you can see them when we have an event and we're putting together a panel, that they're going out of their way to find women leaders in the field. When we're trying to fill a new board seat, we're trying to look for somebody outside of the geospatial industry. And so actually, people understanding the why, it helps to have numbers, but also it helps when they experience it themselves.
Yes, excellent. No, I love your perspective, Nadine, and that's exactly, it's really experienced it. And also, I would say, having leaders that are diverse, that are successful, and perhaps your favorite, leader that you've ever worked with, it's just a proof that that's how it actually works, and that those influencers, leaders as influencers, that is also happening. So being one is actually, I think, the biggest kind of attraction to that leader. Just being a strong, diverse leader that respects different perspectives, but can also make decisions in times of disruption. So how, as a leader, Nadine, again, do you act in time of disruption, such as this disruption that we're all part of? And how does diversity inform that perspective?
That's a very, very difficult question. Let's all agree.
You don't have to answer.
Because I think, the disruption doesn't happen. It's like a process. So sometimes you don't detect it. It's not like this point in time. It materializes at a point in time, but behind it is so many things. And it's not like a black and white. And I think, again, I go back to, you cannot do it alone. If we're going to disrupt, the leadership or the it has to be, you have to have your support, your support team behind you, people who believe in that same, I love what David Ganuccia was saying, the clear, ambitious vision. Yes. That's how you're all together actually changing. And to me, like part of another example, I like usually the concrete stuff. We just got, for the first time in the OGC history, a marketing director for OGC. And so we picked him outside of the spatial industry. And that's been an eye-opening. For him, he's learning, of course, tons, but for us, because he's giving us this perspective, because when you live in something, it's very different to see the other side. And again, this is such a simple thing. He's disrupting us, and then together, we're able to deal with this whole, for example, disruption in our ecosystem. Yes. in a more diverse way.
Excellent. Well, those are actually very good practical points, Nadine. It's really, it's amazing how much we can do by just being open-minded and open to different perspectives. So I think that's another hack that we can safely, propose to our attendees. And I'm also wondering, David Gachucci, now I love pronouncing your name. Getting some practice, but any thoughts on sort of disruption and how to really truly lead an organization, through disruption? And also, is there anything that comes to mind? Is there diversity that can inform your perspective in times of disruption? So just any of those things. I'm kind of putting questions together because we're having so much fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a great question, and I think for all of us here, nobody could have ever predicted we would be sitting in our backyards with or living rooms. I was going to say Paul has a beautiful backyard. I'd love to talk about and or in Paris somewhere. And nobody ever predicted that we would be where we are today. I think we have probably seen one, if not two, of the greatest disruptions of our lifetime in what the COVID pandemic has brought, and obviously the Black Lives Matter and social justice movement and how it's changed so much about how we think. So in times of disruption, I think very quickly, the things that come to mind immediately is disruption signals danger at first. When disruption comes around you, the human instinct is to kick into danger mode. And I think one of the best things a good leader must be able to do is understand the danger from as many perspectives as possible. A lot of the times leaders focus on one perspective. You know, if you're a technology company, we had a product idea that we were launching in Kenya, and we missed the bus, and we got disrupted. And I think we got disrupted in that particular area because we were looking only in one direction. So diversity really helps you to see your blind spot, to see things coming from behind, to see things coming from above. I think, you know, it's also important to be able to, in times of disruption, the key thing that we've seen the great leaders do and the poor leaders not do is communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate what you know, communicate what you don't know, communicate what you want to know. And I think those are two things that I live by that have helped me in this time of disruption, which is probably the greatest time of disruption for me personally in my business, but also in the little disruptions that come along the way. As Nadine said, they come out of nowhere. I think, you know, also to self-understand is something that's really important, to look at your strengths and your weaknesses and how they are changing in light of the new disruptive environment. Those are some specific things that I, you know, take away from dealing with disruption.
Thank you so much, David. This is, and how do you just, you know, this is amazing. Those are very wise words, and obviously you're applying them to your sort of your leadership is leveraging sort of that perspective. And as you were saying, knowing your blind spots and or knowing things that you're not really good at, for example, complementing them with additional perspectives, creating your team not because they think like you or look like you. It's actually advisable to do it in an opposite way, which is proven to, you know, help with decision making and more sustainable outcomes. So a practical decision could be to, you know, involve more women or people of different sort of age groups or so on and so forth. But I think that's a common thing that I'm also hearing from everyone throughout the panel. So that's great. Thank you very much, David. Ted, quickly, we want to leave some time for Q&As. So just any thoughts on, you know, disruption and how diversity can inform leaders' perspective in times of disruption, please.
Yeah, the question's for me or
sure,
or Ted, right?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, well, when it comes to disruption, you know, I remember an elder turned around telling me, he said, change is good, you know, change is very, very good. And what he was saying, disruption is very good. In our business, we work on a collaborative model. So I'm looking for all of those different opinions and, you know, to cover those particular blind spots. And the way I kind of look at disruption in terms of, you know, everybody has a kind of role to play in how they manage disruption. COVID is a perfect example of it. You know, some of the decisions that were made, hey, listen, we're moving the office to 365, it makes more sense and so on. So that decision was made 3 years ago. And one part of our business said, no, we're going to keep everything internal. And, you know, the decision that was made 3 years ago was really a good one compared to you were doing at that point in time. So we had to kind of catch up. So that kind of diversity of thought is very important. But I think as a leadership, and I love what David said, you know, about, you know, actually creating this environment for people to, you know, to become the best. What it is magnanimity of character. And that's one of the things that I guess leadership has to have, especially when it's disruptive, is to kind of remove all the roadblocks that will, you know, make that leader come out from from being able to manage a particular crisis or problem and so on and so forth, and kind of leaving the talent do the talented work, that kind of thing, because we can't be everything to everybody, and especially when you're in a climate of disruption. So the natural tendency is not to fear it, but to embrace it, but also to be very wise and working in it and get those get those collaborative models going and those collaborative opinions. And as a leader, you basically try to, you have to, in the end, someone has to make a decision at the very end of the day. But what happens in that particular environment, everybody owns a decision, so, and that makes it a lot easier to kind of push ahead through the disruption. So the COVID pandemic has actually been good, I think, in a way, because we're thinking about everything. They say, don't waste a good crisis.
Yeah. So I guess being an optimist is another leadership factor.
Yeah, we're gonna come through this,
Okay, good. Thank you so much, David. So finally, Ted, if you do have any thoughts on sort of how to act in times of disruption as a leader and how diversity informs that perspective, please, we only have a couple of minutes. Thank you.
I'm guessing you might mean me.
Yes.
Well,
I'm
that's
sorry,
okay.
you did not hear.
That's all right. No, it's actually, that gives me a perfect in, because in all this talk about names, I have this name where every time I go to a hotel, it doesn't matter where I am in the world, or an airport check-in desk, oh my gosh, Mr. Kennedy. It's like it's in all of the the world of privilege. I think, funnily enough, despite having no connection at all to any famous Kennedys, it gets a lot of it helps me out a lot. Anyway, but I guess in times of disruption, I think, and there's some fascinating insights from everybody, really interesting. For me, it often comes down to trust, and I always kind of default to trust the team, make sure expectations are clear, make sure everybody knows where they can come for information or for check-ins or guidance or whatever. But it's so much more important now. I'm in the office, but there are probably only 70 or 80 people in our office that normally holds 600 or 700, and there are lots of people I haven't seen in months, but being able to trust the team to execute on those big programs or to drive those big pursuits and contract negotiations and all those things, I think I've certainly found this to be reassuring in that respect, that if you have a good network and a good team of people, they can just go out and execute. And David's comments about communication and collaborative decision making are all really good. But I also think that it's one of those times where I struggle, because I tend to be on somewhere between 10 and 20 Zoom sessions a day. And what I miss about having people in the office and having the team around me is I have to very consciously stop and find those other perspectives. I find it much more challenging. Like, the perspectives don't sort of automatically come in because Zoom and some of these tools they're much more kind of transactional, I find, and when we can see people and really interact with them, it's much easier for a person like me to just get that by osmosis, because I naturally will absorb from the environment around me, but the environment around me is mostly my wife and my kids at the moment. So, and they're great, like, they have lots to offer and they're not afraid to give me their opinions, but it's not the same. And so, I try to consciously take a little bit of time when I have decisions to make or things to review and say, I need to reach out to this person or that person and ask actively, because they don't even know that I'm thinking about it.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Paul. It's so good to hear, all those sort of, they're unique sort of items that everyone brought, but kind of together, applied to the group of people that you're either leading or you're aligned to on sort of in operations and so on. it's going to be key to again, there's a diversity of thought, diversity of sort of individual traits, but also again, diversity of thinking, different ways of thinking, and different sort of interesting perspectives. So we have some time for Q&As. Tessa, will you help us with the questions, please?
Hi, it's John here.
Oh, John, you're there.
I can help on the questions. So the first question is from Saida, who I think is one of our Go Geomatics leaders. Thank you for this great discussion, as mentors play an important role for success. What is your suggestion for connecting with diverse mentors in geospatial field, especially for junior professionals and students? Yeah, I would throw that's for anybody in the panel.
I can chime in on that a little bit, because for me, mentorship and sponsorship are two different things. Mentorship kind of shows you how to do the job and shows you the ropes and so on and so forth. Sponsorship is a whole different level where where you're saying, that David Acko guy, he's a real great guy, and I'm going to invest in it, and you put your word behind that, and even your own money. And we kind of run an internship program. We're taking profit from our consulting practice and also some wage subsidy dollars when they're available, or figuring out ways to bring on. What we find is when we have invested in that person as much as that, our customers feel, this person has got a lot of worth, and no one ends up last on our payrolls for the Indigenous ones. That's why we encourage that to move on to their next part of their career. So I think once you make those distinctions between whether you're going to do mentorship or whether you're going to do sponsorship, is going to drive the way you're going to run diversity within your organization. I hope that answers sort of the question of thinking things from a different lens.
I believe it was, David. I would also say that I think John John Murphy's, Jonathan Murphy of Go Geomatics plays a crucial role in bringing us all together. I remember being, I'm a female in geospatial industry, and I know that there were not too many in our area. But, kind of going to meetups or kind of meeting different students or, professionals, it shows to them that, we see that's possible, these people are around, and whether it's just sharing some information or, connecting people to different organizations that might be looking, or I think John actually plays a big role in all this. So kudos to John.
Thank you. Nadine, Paul, Mr. Gachuche, any thoughts?
Yeah.
I was gonna say just what Viviana just said as a thank you to Jonathan, because we're talking about leadership and we're talking about diversity, and he's the brains and the power and the energy and the sleepless nights behind this conference. So thank you. And your point, Viviana, as in this is one of the forums, right? I call them like speed dating, maybe as a way to, connect diverse mentors and people. We offer these, little events, or, literally we're starting to call them speed dating, because sometimes all you need is that introduction. So before maybe even the mentorship, it's that introduction. And there is a responsibility on us professionals to bring you and to inspire you and to give you the opportunities, but there's also on your end as young professionals that drive, that initiative, that hunger, and that's what clicks. And that's why I call it speed dating, because you would click with somebody because we all come from different places. So sprinkling these in these events like this is just at least step zero. And I honestly believe when the click is there, it follows. You don't need an actual process or something. People are here to help each other if you are willing to put in the work to actually get somewhere. So it's both.
Yeah, I think, that's great perspective, Nadine. And I think just to add to what David Echo said, from my perspective, one of the most powerful things that helped me at an early stage in my career was the internship and volunteering. Today, a lot of young people coming out of work, want to start making money immediately. But I think the experience and connections and the lessons you can gain from internships, volunteer opportunities are fantastic ways to build mentorship. I was incredibly fortunate to be mentored by a wonderful geomatics firm in Calgary named GeoAnalytic, which was run by a very diverse team. And I talk about professionally diverse. They had remote sensing specialists, land survey specialists, they had software development, and I was ready to work for free. But I can tell you that the 16 months that I spent there, working on evenings and weekends and putting in the time that Nadine is talking about helped really contribute to my understanding of the field and some of the skills that I needed to then go on and work or start my own business. So I think seeking mentorship through internships and volunteer opportunities is a really good place to start. Of course, number two is if you don't know how to get to those opportunities, the GeoMatics socials are a fantastic place to mix with professionals and people in the same situation as yourself and share where some of those opportunities are. So I think those are some specific things I would probably, suggest to.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, David. David Gachuche. And,
so are we ready
to continue with learning David's last name? I messed up Paul's. Didn't I call you Ted Kennedy?
That's maybe the one Kennedy I don't want to be associated tightly with, but
I was looking for Ted.
That's right.
So Paul. Okay. So Paul, did you also want to weigh in, or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I thought David Ackel's comments on sponsorship versus mentorship are really important, because I think mentorship's great. And it can be helpful, particularly for people who are already sort of energized and ambitious and interested in really kind of grabbing onto things. But I think that sponsorship is super important. And I think that finding those patterns, as David Gachuche just said, finding those patterns of social interaction. So whether it's presenting a poster at a conference, or you're starting in that phase of interacting with folks from industry or government or wherever, and trying to find somebody who's a good fit. Nadine's comment about, if that fit works, it's easy. And if somebody's willing to put in the work and the energy and the effort, I always, because it's one of my flaws, I'm terrible at saying no. I've decided to turn it into a strength and saying that I just embrace yes. And I encourage people to embrace yes, because if I'd been better at saying no and kind of controlling the environment around me when I was younger, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. And I think part of it for me is being able to quickly assess an opportunity and say, is this really for me? And really going and embracing the things that you decide to do.
Well, thank you. You've embracing this opportunity, Paul, and joining us at a short notice. There are a few more questions. I'm not sure how we are with time.
We can take a couple more, I think. Okay. Did you want me to grab another one?
Please. Thank you.
I just want to add one last thought on this before we depart from it. We talk a lot about diversity of employees, but there's also diversity of suppliers, that are one of the bigger keys as well. And I got to, again, going back to it, I'm going to throw some great kudos for Jonathan and GeoIgnite. Just fact by having a diversity of suppliers and being able to expose an Indigenous supplier, that led to us to having, jump-starter contracts, the tower that we had, because we were able to show, a different perspective on how to put in Indigenous traditional knowledge into space science. And that kind of, and it had a eureka moment for for NRCan at the time and MDA actually, where they're looking at and saying, you know what, this is a key thing that we should be exploring as well. So we focus on the employees, absolutely very, very important, but also focus on the diversity of suppliers because they do bring in those other thoughts as well and thought leadership into the industry, you know, and it could be something as, that is totally unrelated, you know, in an unrelated field. So just put that into the mix as well.
And DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, as I understand, as well.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So we'll go to the next question. So, as a Black woman, not me, I'm reading.
What's wrong with that?
I'm reading the question just for anybody on audio. As a Black woman at the beginning of my career in this industry, I rarely, if ever, see anyone that looks like me. I've experienced microaggression more times than I can count. I find this to be very difficult to advance or even get a new position, scared of racial bias. What would be a way to combat racial bias in the hiring process and in advancement opportunities? So that's for anybody in the panel.
That is an amazing and important question and very difficult one to tackle, but
I would love to answer.
Me too.
Go ahead. Well, David.
I'll let Nadine go first.
No, please, you start.
Okay, David.
I think, you know, this, I have to say, and I see the question there, and I'd love to know the name of the person who answered it so we could actually address you by the name, because I think that's, you know, this is a real problem. It is a real problem that exists. And I can't, and it's much harder being Black and being a Black woman in a field of engineering where, first of all, like I mentioned, 25 years ago in Calgary, in this beautiful country of ours, Canada, there were 2 engineers who were Black, and in my Geomatics class, there were 3 or 4 women, I can't remember. And so it is a very difficult situation. I think to answer your question specifically about what can change in the hiring process, I think, you know, just to get away from the how do you get the victim to fix the problem, I think this falls squarely on employers. I think anybody who has an opportunity in a position of authority or in a position of employment must be deliberate. They must be deliberate in understanding that there are so many barriers for people from racialized communities, you know, and not just Black, I think, you know, any racialized community, because of some of the small things that we might have joked about today. But if you can't pronounce my name on my resume, there's a pretty good chance you don't even want to have to converse with me in an interview. And so there are very many things that start to come into play, and then the mindsets and the history and the background. It's not necessarily that the people who are hiring are bad people. I think it's just the way we've become used to it. And I think, you know, the answer to that is for those with hiring power and hiring authority to be deliberate. And when we talk about social justice and the movements that are happening today, they're not about creating, they're not going to change the laws tomorrow, but I think they can change the mindsets around being deliberate. So I think being deliberately conscious about understanding some of the biases that people of racialized communities, women have faced. And when you look back, if you really understand the history of those biases, whether it's racialized impact on Indigenous people or Black people or gender segregation, where girls are told at an early age that they're not good at math. And if you go along with that, well, I think Nadine can stamp that quiet. And I think if you can be very deliberate, and it's something that I've done with my business, I'll tell you right now, I have been deliberate. I have 50% of my senior management team in the 7 different countries that we have offices are women. And I've been deliberate about that and opening up those opportunities. So I think to answer the question that was posed by the Black woman who asked this question, one, I'd want to say, I understand it's really difficult. Now for you, on the person seeking employment perspective, I think we also have a responsibility to stand up and not to fight, but to stand up and break down those barriers That's where the leadership will come from. Not everybody is going to be a leader, or else we would have 40 million prime ministers and presidents all over the world. And so when you do have an opportunity and you feel that barrier that is imposed on you because of your race or your fear of racial aggression, I think there's been a lot of progression in the law today that will protect you. So don't be afraid to present yourself and keep on presenting yourself. But really, the burden falls on the employer and the hiring of authority and people in power to make that change by being a lot more deliberate about opening their minds to employing people from racialized communities, women in science and engineering, and just making an effort that's more specific.
Yeah, just to add on to it, and being deliberate, it is key to it. I work on this progressive Aboriginal relations group from the Council of Aboriginal Business, and in there they have what they call a HR driver, and the HR driver really asks the question: what is your processes? What is your targets in terms of engaging with Indigenous talent? So that you can't get more deliberate than that, because you're asking a question, to HR. And then you start really getting into other things like unconscious bias, from an Indigenous perspective, you got to go through 5 or 6 negative stories before you get to one positive one. So you can't imagine how much that plays into the person's psyche. And from a personal perspective, I really didn't call myself Indigenous until I was 22 and stuff like that. And when I did that, it's funny because I was always mixed up as like, hey, you're a very tall Filipino guy, so I was there like, no, I'm not Filipino, I'm actually Indigenous. And it was really kind of interesting. Well, why would anybody assume that? And I realized it was because they don't see Indigenous people, working in an engineering firm or anything like that. So that was one part of it. But once I wore that on my sleeve, then, you don't pay taxes, you don't do this, you don't do that, that kind of thing. And that plays really into your psyche as well, in terms of your net worth, that kind of thing. So either does 2 things. It makes you either recede, internally, like you don't want to associate with this. And this happens a lot. There's a book written about that, Indigenous people. It's called Hidden in Plain Sight. The people that don't acknowledge their indigeneity because they want to be pushed away from it, or other ones that become totally militant about what they're saying. And then they push it. I decided to become very militant about it. So when we created ACOSIS, because of that experience, when, that kind of thing, when my partner and I, she's Indigenous as well, created ACOSIS, we created it deliberately to be a safe space for Indigenous people to work. As basic as that, to grow and to work. And sponsorship and putting our money where our mouth is and all the rest of this kind of stuff, we felt we were changing the landscape of our customers. By putting out these, being able to move from our payroll to their payroll. And it was, the irony of the whole thing, it wasn't about them being Indigenous. It was about what talent they bring into the team, so through that kind of sponsored internship program. So I think, to David's point, if HR is very deliberate, about what they're doing, they pick and choose their battle. If it's going to be women in geospatial, great, do that. If it's going to be Indigenous people in geospatial, great, do that. And you zero in and you become very crystallized and focused. And once you meet those metrics, then you can move on to the next group and so on and so forth. Because one of the challenges is if you try to be everything to everybody, you're going to be nothing to nobody. So, and that again comes down to leadership or what the process is, and then also make that relationship between. It makes very good business sense to be diverse, to have a diversity of thought and to have that inclusion. It makes good business sense,
I think if I can piggyback on this, again, back to whoever asked the question, I love you. I hope we know your name, because you mentioned it also pains me to read it, right? Because we're in 2020, for crying out loud, but we still have these conversations. But I want to reassure you, it's a horrible reassurance, but you're not the only one who experiences microaggressions more times than you can count. I still experience them more than I can count in more ways. This is why it would be good to actually connect with you personally. The only thing I would advise you to do, because I think the two Davids covered what HR can do very nicely. I think from your personal perspective, don't ever say I'm scared of anything, racial bias or anything, because you're amazing as you are. You stood up, you asked the question. You're obviously very invested in your career because you're even in this conference virtually. So you're actually doing the effort. So I would just tell you to take that as one of your strengths, like David was saying. It's like, I actually bring something that other people don't. And if they don't acknowledge it, honestly, it's their loss. And eventually your work speaks for yourself. Eventually, your passion speaks for itself. And I would then say, belong to Women in Geospatial, because it's a very supportive group. And then from the HR perspective, like David Gagush was saying, if you're deliberate about it, right, you go to these and post your position in these groups. So, and we start to help each other. The Society of Women Engineers has, had that same support. I had belonged to Women in Aviation. So find those, they shouldn't be bubbles, but they're networks, because they support you. And then the HR would look at these networks as, conduits for actually recruiting the best of the best, but from these, different diverse pockets. So please don't be scared. You should be proud and confident, and, you got it.
Yeah. It takes a lot of guts.
Yeah.
To do what you just did.
This is so beautifully said. Nadine as well, and I'm sorry to hear that both this lady and yourself and have encountered anything but positive kind of reinforcement or support. We don't live in an ideal world, and people unfortunately don't appreciate. Or actually, they're scared of different. I would say there's a bit of fear in all this as well. Maybe those people that are not seeing you as who you are, they're maybe afraid of something or someone who's being different. And phobia is the fear of unknown, and it's really kind of being afraid of unknown. Unknown. This doesn't help you, but I'm just telling you that I would just agree with everything that was said by both Davids and Nadine, and maybe John, something to keep in mind that I think we need to apply more sort of diversity in all sorts of things that we're kind of looking at doing. We already are, but and this is a start. This is our second year, and I'm proud that we've started this prior to this being it thing for the conferences. We've done it genuinely to help people see different perspectives, but also help organizations leverage what diversity brings as a competitive advantage, actually. So it does pain me as well for this person to be experiencing this. I don't know how to help, like from the top of my head, but some people change their names on a resume and get different results, which is ridiculous. Anglicized maybe, or it's just, I don't know. I'm not advising that, but I'm just saying that unconscious bias is present and alive. We have to fight it. We all have to fight it. Whether you're, an ally or a person going through it, we have the responsibility to help each other out.
Well said. So we are well over 20 minutes past our end date. We do have a few more questions, but I think we're going to need to wrap this up. Does anyone, do we want to have any closing thoughts from the panel?
Can I just quick comment on that last question? I would have loved to hear from Paul from the perspective of a large organization. I think David, Nadine, working in private sector, David, in different types of organization. I've always wondered what how a problem like that can be solved from a massive company like MDA and the size of those type of companies. And I think in the interest of diversity, I would love to hear I think it's from a big, more so from the big company perspective, and what your advice would be to this young lady or this lady who is experiencing these challenges.
David, I'm going to add 20 minutes for Paul's answer to the time. Paul, feel free to just go to town.
I'll just go for a while. No, so I guess it's funny because my answer when asked for input on this was going to be basically, I don't think I can help, and everybody's had such great answers that I would just kind of leave it there. But I guess what I would say, David, is I think there's two things. The advice to this applicant to stand up and be noticed and be confident and be strong and keep going after opportunities, I think is really important. But I took your message at the beginning of this conversation really to heart, because it's funny. It's how I think, because it's how I think about diversity issues all the time, which is about being deliberate, like making sure that in the cadence of business and in the tempo of like everything we do every day, we figure out how to think about it. So one of the things that came up as you were talking about being deliberate is I thought, okay, like we have a talent acquisition team, right? Because we're a big company and I don't know, we probably have over 100 recs on the street at the moment, right? We're trying to hire like crazy. I don't know how they deal with this, right? They're great people. They're fantastic people, run by a fantastic woman named Barb Bunting, and they really do their jobs well. But I don't know how they deal with situations like this. And I don't know how sort of structurally, I know at the very senior levels, like Mike Greenlee, who's the CEO, has come in and made some very conscious decisions. I think I looked it up just before we got on here, 6 of his 14 direct reports are women in very senior roles, leading critical parts of the business and finance and operations and all things. But at that sort of working level, as we bring people into the company, I feel like one of the things that I need to take out of this is figuring out that deliberate element of how do we go and figure out how to draw more people in, rather than worrying about filtering. In some places we have to think about drawing, right? And that is one of, for me, this whole conversation has been really fascinating. And that for me is one of the key takeaways, because I'm pretty good, I think, or I try hard to be deliberate in other parts of our activity or in my day-to-day work. But that's one place where I think we definitely I need to understand better what our tempo is and how we can introduce those very deliberate elements to it. So, So thanks for that, because I think it's helpful. It's probably not a good answer for what you were hoping, but it's the only one I have. Sorry.
I've met Barb Bunting, and we've talked a lot about this, and it really comes down to when people talk about diversity is really the individuals within the organizations, and also the leadership. Will the leadership give them the ability and remove all those blocks so that the Barb Buntings of the world and all the rest can actually do what they need to do to get those numbers? So that's where it really comes, that rubber hits the road, among leadership, And it boils down to that first part, and I think we're coming a little bit full circle here, about magnanimity of character. That's really the key of good leadership, is to be able to bring the best out of the person that's in front of you, And if you focus in on that, we wouldn't hear a comment like that. We would be turning around and removing her barriers, for her success, and try to make, the best out of that particular individual. And I think if we take it down to that level, then I think things will change. We'll remove our unconscious biases. We'll remove those kind of things. We'll stop filtering, people out, and then trying to figure out how we can bring people in by what they bring to the table, and being more inclusionistic about how we approach, our hiring practices, our procurement practices, our ways of looking at technology, and so on and so forth. And I really think that's what it is. A good leadership needs to have magnanimity of character.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Billy Anna, did you want to conclude?
Yes, I mean, I'm just blown away. There's so much, like my brain's kind of going. There's so many interesting things that I've heard and I've learned, and I'll be happy to apply and share in the future. My heartfelt thanks to you, our panelists, for your time and wisdom, for sharing your personal experiences that were not perhaps always easy, but are informative to our new leaders. Thank you for being vulnerable as well, and really being able to bring that perspective to us, and especially to young professionals that are just charting their paths in this industry. Thank you so much. Thank you for showing leadership in these times of disruption. I'm really grateful to have you on our panel. Thank you to all the questions and to all our participants. For those questions that have not been answered, we'll do our best to follow up on. John, is there a way to save the questions?
I think so. It'll.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I don't know what to say. It's been a pleasure and a great experience. I apologize for any mistakes, including calling you Ted Kennedy, Paul. But I think it's just part of this. I think it shows that being vulnerable or making mistakes, it's not a big deal. It's being able to listen and learn as well. It will be key to helping people along the way. So. You're great allies in this. I appreciate your time again, and thank you very much for your tremendous contribution to our industry, to our spatial ecosystem.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks. That was great.
Thank
All
you.
right, everybody. Thank you on behalf of Geomatics and GeoIgnite and all the attendees. Bill-Anna, what a fantastic job you've done putting this together. As always, excellent work. Thank you, panelists. So we're going to be off now, but we're coming back at 6 o'clock Eastern time for a geospatial space social with Nick Kellogg. It's going to be very exciting with Deploy Solutions and Kevin from PCI. So again, thank you all very much. I'm sure this is going to be very, very useful for everybody who was involved. I certainly learned a lot as well. Thank you.
And hope to see you next year.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes.
Come back.
I get an invite for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Good one.
Yeah.